I suppose everyone has that one place they go to hide. For some people, it is a bar. For others, a park bench or a library. For me, during the darkest year of my life, it was a place called the Gigabit. It was a 24-hour internet cafe located in the armpit of the city, wedged between a failing laundromat and a payday loan shack. I was 24, recently single, and living in an apartment that felt more like a prison cell than a home. The silence in my apartment was deafening, so I traded it for the white noise of computer fans and the clicking of mechanical keyboards. I became a fixture there. I arrived every night at 8 and stayed until the owner, a guy named Marcus, who looked like he hadn't slept since the 90s, kicked me out for the cleaning crew at 2 in the morning. You learn the rhythm of a place like that. You learn the smells a mixture of stale energy drinks, overheated plastic, and body odor that the air conditioning could never quite scrub away. You learn the regulars. There were the loud teenagers who screamed at their screens, the guys who came in to discreetly browse things they couldn't look at home, and the serious gamers who brought their own mice and headsets. But then there was him, the man in booth 14. We called him Static. I don't remember who started it, maybe Marcus, but the name stuck because he was just white noise in human form. He was always there before I arrived, and he was always there when I left. He sat in the farthest corner of the room, a dead zone where the overhead fluorescent lights flickered and buzzed like dying insects. He wore the same gray oversized hoodie every single night, the hood pulled up so far forward that his face was a permanent shadow. In the 6 months I watched him, I never saw him play a game. Not once. He didn't browse YouTube. He didn't scroll through social media. He didn't even use a mouse. He just typed. It was a constant rhythmic barrage. Click-clack, click-clack. It was faster than anyone I had ever heard. A machine gun tempo that never faltered, never paused for thought. He typed with a purpose that was terrifyingly disciplined. I used to wonder what he was writing. A manifesto? The world's longest novel? Code for some complicated software? My curiosity was a dull ache, something to distract me from my own misery, but I never approached him. There was an aura around booth 14, a repulsive magnetic field that said, stay away. Even the rowdy teenagers gave him a wide berth. Then came that Tuesday in November. It was a miserable night, pouring rain that lashed against the blackened windows of the storefront. The storm had knocked out the power to most of the block, but the Gigabit had a backup generator that kicked in with a guttural roar from the alleyway. The cafe was running on half power. The overhead lights were off, leaving the room illuminated only by the sickly blue glow of the monitors. The storm had kept everyone away. It was just me, Marcus dozing off at the front counter, and Static in the back corner. The cafe was silent, except for the rain and the hum of the generator. I was scrolling through job listings, feeling sorry for myself, when I realized the typing had stopped. The silence from booth 14 was louder than the noise had been. I glanced over my shoulder. Static was slumped forward. His forehead was resting on his keyboard, his arms dangling limply at his sides. He looked like a marionette whose strings had been cut. My first thought was that he had fallen asleep. My second thought, the one that made my stomach tighten, was that he was dead. Heart attack, stroke, overdose. It happens. I looked at Marcus at the front, but he had his headphones on and his eyes closed. I was on my own. I stood up, my chair scraping loudly against the linoleum floor. I waited for Static to flinch at the sound. He didn't move. I walked down the central aisle, the blue light from the screens casting long, dancing shadows on the walls. The air got colder as I approached his corner. It smelled different back there. The stale sweat smell was gone, replaced by something sharp and chemical. It smelled like bleach and copper, the way a butcher shop smells at the end of the day. Hey, I called out softly. "You okay, man?" Nothing. No rise and fall of his shoulders. No sound of breathing. I stepped into his booth. I reached out a hand to shake his shoulder, but my eyes drifted to his monitor. It was the only source of light in that dark corner, and what I saw froze the blood in my veins. He wasn't writing a novel. He wasn't coding. The screen was dominated by a chat window, an old-school IRC channel with a black background and scrolling neon green text. The text was moving so fast it was almost a blur, a waterfall of usernames and numbers. But in the center of the screen was a video feed. It was a night vision camera feed, grainy and green tinted. It showed a small windowless room with concrete walls. In the center of the room was a heavy metal chair bolted to the floor, and strapped to that chair was a woman. She looked young, maybe 20. She was gagged with heavy duct tape, her eyes wide and bulging with a terror that clawed at me through the screen. She was thrashing against the restraints, her body convulsing in panic, but the straps held firm. She was sweating, her hair matted to her forehead. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't look away. My brain tried to tell me it was a movie, a game, a simulation. But the movement was too fluid, the fear too raw. Then I read the chat logs. User_Blade77. 500 credits on the left hand. User_PainFreak. No, use the pliers. Pliers first. User_Godless. 1,000 credits for fire. Make IT burn. At the bottom of the screen, there was an input line. The cursor was blinking, and above it, a status message. ADMIN, static. Voting is currently open. The highest bidder chooses the tool. I realized with a jolt of nausea that Static wasn't just watching. He was the moderator. He was the conductor of this symphony of pain. He was taking bids. On the screen, a door in the concrete room opened. A figure walked in. They were wearing a heavy rubber apron and a welding mask. In their hand, they held a blowtorch. The woman in the chair screamed against her gag, a muffled, desperate sound that the microphone barely picked up. I stumbled back. My foot squeaked on the floor. Static moved. He didn't wake up grudgingly. He snapped upright instantly, spinning his chair around with a fluid, predatory speed. He wasn't asleep. He had been listening. I saw his face for the first time. It wasn't scarred or monstrous. It was terrifyingly ordinary. He looked like an accountant or a high school math teacher. Thin lips, receding hairline, pale skin. But his eyes were wrong. They were completely devoid of empathy, like the eyes of a shark rolling back before a strike. He looked at me. Then he looked at the screen, where the figure with the blowtorch was lighting the flame. Then he looked back at me. He didn't panic. He didn't try to cover the screen. He smiled. It was a small, tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You want to vote?" he asked. His voice was dry and crackling, like stepping on autumn leaves. New users get the first vote for free. The sheer casualness of it shattered me. He was offering me a coupon for torture. I didn't answer. I couldn't speak. My flight response finally kicked in, overriding the paralysis. I turned and ran. I didn't care about dignity. I sprinted down the aisle, knocking over a chair, screaming for Marcus. "Call the cops. Marcus, call the cops." Marcus jerked awake, staring at me with bleary confusion. I didn't stop to explain. I burst through the front door into the pouring rain, slipping on the wet pavement, scrambling to my feet, and running until I was across the street. I hid behind a parked delivery truck, my hands shaking so violently I dropped my phone twice before I managed to dial 911. "There's a woman," I gasped to the operator. "He's hurting her. He's streaming it." I stayed on the line, watching the front door of the gigabit, waiting for Static to come bursting out with a gun or a knife. But the door stayed closed. 10 minutes passed. They felt like 10 years. Then I saw movement. Not at the front door, but down the alleyway. The heavy steel fire exit of the café pushed open. Static walked out. He was calm. He was carrying a computer tower under one arm and a hard drive in his hand. He didn't run. He just walked, stepping over puddles, melting into the shadows of the city night. He looked like a guy taking his computer to get repaired. By the time the police cruiser screeched to a halt, he was long gone. I led the officers inside. Marcus was bewildered, hands raised. We went to booth 14. The desk was empty. The cables were dangling. I told them everything. I described the video, the room, the woman, the blowtorch. One of the detectives, a woman with a hard face, listened intently. When I described the room on the screen, her expression changed. "You said concrete walls?" she asked. "And a zigzag crack running across the floor? You're sure about the crack?" "Yes," I said. It looked like a lightning bolt. It went from the left corner to the center. She exchanged a look with her partner. "Bring him," she said. They led me to the back of the internet cafe, past the bathrooms, to a door I had never noticed before. It was locked. Marcus unlocked it with shaking hands. "It's just the basement," Marcus stammered. "It's just storage. Old chairs, syrup boxes." The detective drew her weapon and pushed the door open. We went down the wooden stairs. The air grew colder. That smell bleach and copper, it was stronger here. The basement was cluttered with junk, just like Marcus said. But in the center of the room, a space had been cleared. There was fresh dust on the floor where something heavy had been dragged away recently. The detective pointed her flashlight at the floor. There, in the concrete, was a zigzag crack. It ran from the left corner to the center. "The signals," the detective whispered. "We couldn't trace the IP because he wasn't bouncing it off satellites. He was hardwired right here." The realization hit me like a physical blow to the gut. Static hadn't been watching a stream from a dungeon in Russia or a basement in Thailand. He was streaming from downstairs. While I was playing games and feeling sorry for myself 10 feet above, a woman was being tortured directly beneath my feet. The floorboards I rested my feet on were the ceiling of her hell. They never caught him. Static, or whatever his name, was vanished into the digital ether. They never found the woman either. The police think he took her with him that night, out the back exit, loaded into a van while I was hiding across the street. I don't go to internet cafes anymore. I have high-speed internet at home now. I keep my curtains drawn. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm browsing Reddit or checking my email, I'll get a friend request from a blank profile. No picture, no name, just a message. "Voting is open. We missed you." I delete the account. I unplug my router. But I know he's out there, and I know he remembers me, because I was the only one who ever saw his face and lived to tell the tale. Or maybe he let me go because he thought I would make a good audience. Desperation has a funny way of making you ignore your instincts. When you have $42 in your bank account and rent is due in 3 days, red flags don't look like warnings. They look like opportunities. That is the only reason I took the job at the Nexus. It was listed on Craigslist under the gigs section, which should have been my first clue. Overnight supervisor needed. Cash pay, immediate start. No questions asked. The interview lasted 3 minutes. The owner, a man named Mr. Henderson, who sweated profusely despite the freezing air conditioning, didn't ask for my resume. He didn't ask for references. He just looked at my size. I'm a big guy, 6'4", and handed me a heavy ring of keys. "Here's the deal," he said, wiping his forehead with a stained handkerchief. "Shift is 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. You clean the floors. You restock the sodas. You keep the vagrants out. That's it." He walked me behind the counter and pointed to a heavy industrial steel door. It looked like the entrance to a bank vault, complete with 3 deadbolts and an electronic keypad. A sign on the front reads Server Room B. "This is the most important rule," Henderson said, his voice dropping to a serious whisper. "You never, ever open this door. The cooling system in there is incredibly delicate. Even a few seconds of outside humidity can destroy the servers. You ruin my equipment, I ruin your life. Do you understand?" I nodded. It seemed easy enough. "Don't open the door." "Got it." The first week was painfully boring. The Nexus was located in a rough part of the city, so the clientele was a mix of insomniac gamers, college students pulling all-nighters, and the occasional homeless person looking for warmth. My job was mostly telling people not to sleep in the chairs. But by the second week, I started to notice the anomalies. First, there was the internet speed. It was unnatural. We had customers who drove in from 3 towns over because they claimed the Nexus had 0 ping. I'm talking about connection speeds that shouldn't exist for a rundown shop in a strip mall. We were running faster than NASA, and yet all I saw in the back office was a dusty old router from 2010. Then there were the noises. They always started around 3 a.m., the dead hour of the night. The shop would be quiet, just the hum of the vending machines. And then, from behind the heavy steel door of Server Room B, I would hear it. It sounded like something heavy being dragged across the concrete floor. It was a wet, heavy sound. I tried to tell myself it was the HVAC system. Maybe the pipes were old. Maybe it was rats. But rats don't drag things that sound like they weigh 200 pounds. One night, around 4 a.m., I was mopping the floor near the door when I heard a voice. It was muffled, indistinct, coming from inside Server Room B. It sounded like a low moan, a sound of distress. I texted Henderson. "Boss, weird noises from Server B sounded like a person. Should I check?" His reply came 5 seconds later. All caps, "No, do not touch the door. It is the cooling fans. Do not go in." I needed the money, so I listened. I put my headphones on and turned the volume up. I ignored the thumps. I ignored the scrapes. But then came the smell. It started on a Tuesday. I walked in for my shift, and the air in the shop was thick. It smelled like antiseptic, burnt hair, and something sweet like rotting fruit. It was coming from under the steel door. It was so strong it made my eyes water. Customers were complaining. 2 guys left early because they said the smell was making them nauseous. I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. If there was an electrical fire starting in there, or a dead animal rotting in the vents, I was the one who would burn to death. That night, fate made the decision for me. Henderson had been in a rush when he left. I saw him fumbling with his pockets as he ran out to his car. When I went to sit behind the counter, I saw it. He had left his master key card. A black magnetic card with a strip of masking tape on it that said Master. It sat there on the laminate counter, taunting me. It was 3:30 a.m. The shop was empty, except for one kid asleep in the back row with his headphones on. The noise started again. And then, a new sound. A rhythmic, mechanical hissing. I stared at the key card. I stared at the door. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I told myself I was just going to peek. Just make sure nothing was on fire. I grabbed the card. My hands were shaking, so bad I almost dropped it. I walked to the steel door. I swiped the card. The light on the keypad turned green. The deadbolts retracted with a loud mechanical. I took a deep breath, held it, and pushed the heavy door open. The heat hit me first. It wasn't cold in there. It was sweltering. It felt like walking into a jungle. The air was wet and thick. I fumbled for the light switch on the wall. The overhead fluorescent tubes flickered to life, buzzing angrily. I blinked, trying to process what I was seeing. I expected racks of blinking servers. I expected towers of black metal and wires. There were no computers. Instead, the room was filled with bathtubs. 6 old, clawfoot porcelain bathtubs were lined up in 2 neat rows. They were filled to the brim with a thick, translucent pink gel. And inside the tubs were people. They were naked, their bodies pale and shriveled like they had been in the water for weeks. Their heads were shaved bald, and drilled directly into the base of their skulls were thick, black fiber optic cables. The cables ran from their heads up to the ceiling, bundling together and feeding into a massive, pulsating modem mounted on the back wall. The modem was blinking furiously with activity. Data transfer. I slapped a hand over my mouth to stop myself from screaming. These weren't just bodies. They were alive. Their chests were rising and falling in shallow, ragged rhythms. Their eyes were taped open with medical tape, staring blindly at the ceiling. Plastic tubes were shoved down their throats, connected to a machine in the corner that was making the hiss-clunk sound. It was a ventilator. Henderson wasn't running a server farm. He was running a human farm. He was using their brains. He was using the neural processing power of human minds to run his network. Crypto mining, hosting illegal data, botnets. I didn't know the technology, but I knew the horror. He was bypassing the hardware limits by using organic processors. I stepped closer to the first tub, my legs feeling like jelly. The man inside was gaunt, his ribs showing through his skin. I recognized him. He was the guy from the missing person flyer I had seen on the telephone pole outside. Missing, David Miller. Last seen 3 weeks ago. He was here. He was a component in a machine. Suddenly, the thump sound happened again. The man in the tub twitched violently. His hand slapped the side of the porcelain tub. Then his fingernails dragged down the side. A scrape. It wasn't a mechanical noise. It was him. He was fighting. He was conscious inside that nightmare. As I stared at him, his eyes, those taped open, bloodshot eyes, shifted. They locked onto mine. There was no intelligence there, just raw, endless suffering. He was begging me. Without a word, he was screaming for death. The chime of the front door rang out. "Hey, anyone working?" It was Henderson's voice. He had come back for his keys. Terror, pure and primal, flooded my system. If he found me in here, I would end up in the 7th tub. I knew that with absolute certainty. I backed out of the room, my eyes still locked on David Miller's face. I pulled the heavy steel door shut. The deadbolts slammed home automatically. I threw the key card back onto the counter, exactly where I had found it. I grabbed a rag and started furiously wiping down a table, my back to the counter. Henderson walked in. He looked frantic. He saw the keys on the counter and let out a sigh of relief. Then he looked at me. He looked at the steel door. He sniffed the air. He knew I had opened it. The smell was drifting out. "I'm quitting," I blurted out, my voice cracking. "Right now. My mom is sick. I have to go." Henderson stared at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. He moved his hand toward his jacket pocket. "That's unfortunate," he said softly. "You saw something, didn't you?" "No," I lied. "I didn't see anything. I just need to go." I didn't wait for his permission. I grabbed my backpack and walked past him. I felt the heat coming off his body as I passed. I expected him to grab me, to stab me, but he just watched. As soon as I hit the sidewalk, I ran. I ran until my lungs burned. I ran straight to the police precinct. I told them everything. I sounded like a lunatic. I told them about the tubs, the cables, the gel, the missing man. They raided the Nexus an hour later. But when they opened server room B, it was empty. The tubs were gone. The cables were ripped out of the walls. The floor smelled of fresh bleach. The room was completely bare. Henderson had vanished. The police told me I had a breakdown. They said sleep deprivation causes hallucinations. They closed the case. But I know what I saw. I know David Miller is still out there, plugged into something, somewhere. And sometimes, late at night, when my internet is running slow, I get a sudden spike in speed. My connection becomes impossibly fast, faster than it should be. And for a split second, through my computer speakers, I hear a sound that isn't digital. I hear a wet. We tell ourselves that we are safe. We build these little bubbles of security around our lives. We lock our front doors at night. We put passwords on our phones. We cover our webcams with little pieces of electrical tape because we read an article once that said hackers can watch us. We think that if we follow the rules of modern privacy, we are invisible. But the truth is, privacy is just a fairy tale we tell ourselves to be able to sleep at night. If someone really wants to watch you, if someone truly dedicates their life to observing yours, walls and passwords are just minor inconveniences. I learned this 2 weeks ago. It destroyed my life. I work as a freelance graphic designer. It sounds like a dream job working from home, making your own hours, but the reality is usually just staring at a screen until your eyes bleed, fueled by caffeine and panic. I live in a cramped apartment complex with thin walls. My neighbor to the left is learning to play the violin and failing miserably, and the guy above me walks around in what sounds like concrete boots. So, when I have a serious deadline, I can't work at home. I have a sanctuary. Or I used to. It's a place called The Loft. It isn't one of those gritty, basement-level gaming cafes with sticky keyboards and the smell of teenage sweat. The Loft is high-end. It's located in the trendy part of downtown, occupying a refurbished industrial warehouse. Exposed brick walls, hanging Edison bulbs, ergonomic Herman Miller chairs, and $7 lattes. It's quiet. It's expensive. It's the kind of place where people go to write screenplays or trade stocks. It feels sterile and safe, like a corporate office. It was a Friday evening, around 7 o'clock. The city outside was getting loud with weekend traffic, but inside the loft, it was a library. Soft, ambient electronic music played over the speakers. The air smelled like roasted coffee beans and expensive cologne. I had a massive project due at midnight, a rebranding package for a tech startup, and I was behind schedule. I bought a large black coffee, found a secluded booth at the very back of the room, and set up my workstation. The layout of the loft is important. The main floor is a sea of desks and computers. Above that, there is a mezzanine balcony with a few lounge chairs, but it was closed for renovations that week, so the upstairs was dark. My booth was tucked right under the overhang of that balcony. It felt cozy, like a little cave. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, blasted some white noise, and vanished into my work. For the first 2 hours, everything was normal. I was in the flow state. The world outside my monitor didn't exist. Then my phone lit up. I ignored it at first. Then my laptop screen chimed. A notification slid into the top right corner of my MacBook. I_C_U would like to share a photo with you. It was an airdrop request. I stopped typing. I stared at the notification. AirDrop is a proximity feature. You have to be within about 30 feet of someone to send them a file. I sighed, annoyed. I figured it was just some bored teenager or a troll trying to distract people. You get that sometimes in public places. People beaming memes or stupid pictures to strangers just to see who reacts. I clicked decline and went back to work. I didn't have time for games. 5 minutes later, the chime sounded again. I_C_U would like to share a photo with you. I felt a spark of irritation. I took my headphones off and swiveled in my chair, scanning the room. The cafe was fairly full. To my left was a guy in a suit typing furiously on a BlackBerry. To my right, a group of college students were studying quietly. No one was looking at me. No one was snickering or holding up a phone. I turned back to my screen. Okay, I muttered to myself. You want to play? I opened my system preferences and switched my AirDrop receiving setting from everyone to contacts only. That should have been the end of it. I blocked the signal. I created a digital wall. I took a sip of my coffee, satisfied, and reached for my mouse. Suddenly, my screen flickered. It went black for a split second, then flashed white. A file window popped open on my desktop. I froze. I hadn't clicked accept. I had turned the feature off. But the file was there, sitting on my desktop, glowing with a mocking persistence. Someone had bypassed the security protocols. This wasn't a prank. This was a brute force hack. The file was a JPEG image. The file name made my stomach turn over. Hello_Tim.jpg. My name is Tim. My computer is named admin, not Tim. My public profile is hidden. Whoever this was, they knew exactly who I was. I sat there for a long moment, my finger hovering over the trackpad. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to close the laptop and walk away. But curiosity is a poison. It overrides survival. I had to know what they had sent. I double-clicked the file. The image opened in full screen. It was a photograph of me. I leaned in, squinting. The photo was high resolution. It showed me walking through the glass front doors of the loft. I was wearing the same jacket I had on now. I was holding my laptop bag. The timestamp in the corner of the metadata read 7:05 p.m. 2 hours ago. But it was the angle that unsettled me. The photo was taken from high up, looking down. It wasn't taken from the street level. It looked like it had been taken from the second-floor mezzanine, the balcony that was supposed to be closed. I spun around in my chair, craning my neck to look up at the dark railing of the balcony behind me. It was empty. There were some stacked chairs and a few buckets of paint, but no people. The shadows up there were deep, though. Inky black pools where the light didn't reach. I felt a prickle of unease on the back of my neck, that primal sensation of being watched by a predator. I scanned the cafe again. Was the guy in the suit watching me? Was the barista staring? Everyone seemed normal. Everyone was minding their own business. Calm down, I whispered. Someone took a creepy picture. It's weird, but it's not dangerous. Just ignore it. I tried to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe someone I knew was up there earlier and snapped a candid shot to say hello later. I dragged the file to the trash bin and tried to refocus on my project. I typed a few sentences, but my heart wasn't in it. I kept glancing at the periphery of my vision, jumping at shadows. 10 minutes passed. I was just starting to regulate my breathing when the laptop chimed again. A new file appeared on the desktop. It didn't even ask for permission this time. It just manifested. Last_night.jpg. I stared at those two words. Last night, The air in the cafe suddenly felt very cold. The ambient music seemed to drop away, leaving only the rushing sound of blood in my ears. My hand shook as I clicked the file. The image opened. My breath hitched in my throat, a strangled gasp that drew a look from the guy in the suit next to me. The photo was of a bed. My bed in my apartment. The room was dark, illuminated only by the faint, grainy green tint of night vision or low light enhancement. In the center of the bed was a figure under the duvet. It was me. I was asleep, curled on my side, one arm hanging off the edge of the mattress. I know my bedroom. I know the posters on the wall, the pile of laundry on the chair, the specific way the streetlights cast shadows through the blinds. This was my room. But the camera angle, it was impossible. The photo was taken from inside my closet. My closet has louvered folding doors. In the picture, you could see the blurry outline of the wooden slats on the sides of the frame. The camera lens was positioned through the crack between the doors, peering out into my bedroom like a spy in a horror movie. I looked at the timestamp, 3:14 a.m. I live alone. I locked my front door. I put the chain on. I checked the window latches. I am paranoid about security. But last night, at 3:14 in the morning, while I was dreaming, someone was standing 3 feet away from me. Someone was inside my closet, holding a camera, watching me sleep. They could have stepped out. They could have touched me. They could have killed me. Instead, they took a picture. Panic, cold and sharp, flooded my system. This wasn't a hacker in the cafe. This was a stalker. This was a predator who had followed me here. I stood up abruptly, my chair clattering back against the desk behind me. I didn't care about the scene I was making. I needed to get out. I needed to go to the police station immediately. I grabbed my backpack and started shoving my cables into it with trembling hands. I wasn't even going to shut down the computer. I was just going to slam the lid and run. But before I could close the laptop, the screen flickered a third time. A new window opened. This one was larger. It wasn't a JPEG. It was a video file. Look_up.mov. The file name wasn't a title. It was a command. Look up. I stood there, paralyzed. My hands were gripping the edge of the desk so hard my knuckles were white. I didn't want to watch it. I wanted to run blind into the night. But my eyes were traitorous. They locked onto the screen. The video started playing. It wasn't a recording. It didn't have a timeline bar at the bottom. It was a live stream. The footage was shaky handheld. The quality was crystal clear. It showed the top of a head, messy brown hair, a gray sweater, the collar of a denim jacket. I reached up and touched my hair. On the screen, a hand reached up and touched the hair. It was me. It was the back of my head right now, in real time. I spun around wildly, expecting to see someone standing right behind me with a phone. But there was no one. The aisle behind my booth was empty. The wall was 5 feet away. There was no angle for a camera. I looked back at the screen. The camera zoomed out slightly. The perspective was confusing. It wasn't coming from behind me. It was coming from above me. The camera was filming through a series of metal slats. I looked at the video, then I looked at the ceiling of my booth. The loft had an industrial drop ceiling, those square acoustic tiles suspended in a metal grid. Directly above my head, maybe 4 feet above me, was a ventilation grate. It was a standard, dirty white metal vent used for air conditioning. On the video feed, I saw my own face turn upwards. I saw the terror in my own eyes as I looked into the lens. The camera was inside the ventilation shaft. I stood frozen, staring up at that grate. And then I saw it. The grate wasn't screwed in. It was shifted slightly to the side, leaving a crescent-shaped gap of darkness. And in that slice of shadow, something glinted. It was the reflection of the blue light from my monitor. It was a lens. And right next to the lens, pressed against the metal slots, was a human eye. It was wide, unblinking, and wet. It was staring directly into mine. For a second, neither of us moved. The world narrowed down to that single, hateful eye in the ceiling. Then I screamed. It wasn't a manly shout of courage. It was a raw, guttural shriek of pure primal fear. I threw myself backward, tripping over my chair, scrambling away from the booth on my hands and knees. "He's in the ceiling!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "There's someone in the ceiling!" The cafe went dead silent. The music seemed to stop. 50 people turned to look at me. The barista dropped a pitcher of milk. They looked at me like I was having a psychotic break, like I was hallucinating. "He's right there." I pointed a shaking finger at the vent. And then the ceiling gave way. There was a loud crack, like a gunshot, as the metal grid buckled. The acoustic tiles around the vent exploded in a shower of white dust and plaster. A body fell out of the ceiling. It hit my desk with a sickening, heavy thud, smashing my laptop into pieces, and then rolled off onto the floor. It was a man, but he didn't look like a man. He looked like a creature that had been living in the walls. He was incredibly thin, his limbs wiry and emaciated. He was dressed in black clothing that was stained gray with dust and fiberglass insulation. His face was streaked with soot. He smelled awful, a pungent mix of old sweat, urine, and rotting food that instantly filled the area. Strapped to his chest with duct tape was a GoPro camera. The red recording light was still blinking. He scrambled to his feet with terrifying agility. He looked like a spider, his limbs moving too fast. He looked at me. I was on the floor, backed up against a stranger's table. Blood was trickling from his nose, where he had hit the desk, but he was grinning. His teeth were impossibly white against his dirty face. He didn't attack me. He didn't pull a knife. He just leaned in, his face inches from mine, and whispered. His voice was raspy, unused, like gravel grinding together. "I have so much footage, Tim," he hissed. "We're going to make a masterpiece." Then he bolted. He moved faster than I thought a human could move. He vaulted over the counter, shoved a terrified waitress into a display of muffins, and kicked open the rear fire exit. The alarm began to blare, a piercing siren that matched the chaos in my mind. By the time the security guard realized what was happening, the man was gone. He had vanished into the alleyway, swallowed by the night. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They taped off the area. They treated it like a crime scene, which it was. One of the officers, a heavy-set guy with a flashlight, climbed up a ladder to inspect the hole in the ceiling. He was up there for a long time. When he came down, his face was pale. "You need to see this," he said to his partner. "They found the nest. That's the only word for it." In the crawl space between the drop ceiling and the actual roof of the warehouse, the man had built a home. He had arranged slabs of pink fiberglass insulation to make a bed. There were empty wrappers from energy bars. There were dozens of empty water bottles, some filled with yellow liquid. He had been up there for weeks, maybe months. He had tapped into the cafe's power lines. He had hardwired his own router into their network, which was how he bypassed my security. But the worst part was the notebook. They found a spiraled notebook lying on his bed. It was filled with handwriting that was small, cramped, and obsessive. It was a log, a list of subjects. Subject 1, Sarah, too boring. Routine, predictable. Crossed out. Subject 2, Mike, always sits in the front. Hard to film. Crossed out. I was subject 7. Under my name, he had written pages of notes. He drinks black coffee. He uses an ergonomic mouse. He scratches his left ear when he's stressed. And then, the notes from outside the café followed him home Tuesday. Ground floor apartment. Easy access. He sleeps on his left side. He talks in his sleep. He forgets to lock the bathroom window. He had been watching me at the cafe and then following me home. He had been living in the ceiling during the day and standing in my closet at night. They never caught him. The police dusted for fingerprints, but his fingertips were burned smooth, probably from handling hot equipment or chemicals. He had no ID. The face recognition software came up with nothing. He was a ghost. I couldn't go back to my apartment. I broke my lease the next day. I left my furniture, my clothes, everything. I couldn't touch anything that he might have touched. I moved to a different state. I live in a house now, not an apartment. I have a security system with cameras on every corner. I have motion sensors on the windows. I had the vents in the ceiling screwed shut and painted over. But I don't sleep. Not really. Every time the house settles, every time a floorboard creaks, or the wind rattles a window, I'm wide awake, clutching a baseball bat, staring at the dark corners of the room. I bought a new phone, new number, new email. But this morning, I woke up and checked the time. My wallpaper had been changed. I didn't change it. It was a photo. A new photo. It was taken from the attic hatch of my new house, looking down into the hallway. You can see my bedroom door in the frame. The timestamp was 4 a.m. this morning, and below the photo, a text message from a blocked number. The sequel is always better than the original. He's not finished with his movie yet, and I have a terrible feeling that the ending is going to be a tragedy. And that's all for tonight. Remember, the most terrifying monsters are the ones that look just like us. The ones who might even live right next door. If these stories serve as a good reminder to trust your instincts, then show your support and like and subscribe. Hitting that bell means you'll get a warning before the next nightmare begins. Sleep well, if you can.